The late afternoon economy cabin buzzed with familiar sounds. The thud of suitcases hitting overhead bins, hushed exchanges between passengers, flight attendants ticking off names on the safety roster. Everything moved with the usual rhythm. In seat 23A, Tiana Hill, a 15-year-old black girl with bright eyes and a composed demeanor, had her earbuds in, methodically underlining passages in an advanced economics textbook. Her hoodie, embroidered with the Student Council logo and the scholarship forms bulging from her backpack, hinted at a promising future. Then, something shifted. Indefinably. The light seemed sharper. Conversations trailed off mid-sentence. A kind of quiet alertness spread, instinctive and unspoken. Victoria Sterling emerged at the end of the aisle. Her ivory blazer fastened with pearl buttons, deep crimson heels striking a deliberate but unhurried rhythm. Every detail on her, from the diamond necklace and cognac Hermes bag to the calculated tilt of her head, was curated to command the space. When Victoria's gaze swept over Tiana and lingered half a second longer than necessary, a taut tension, fine as a piano wire, hummed around them. No one said a word, yet it felt as if everyone had just caught a scent. Not of perfume, but of prejudice. Victoria's critical gaze sweeps the economy cabin with the practiced eye of someone who has spent decades perfecting the art of finding fault in her surroundings. Her expression carries the particular disdain of someone who believes that proximity to people of lesser economic means somehow diminishes her own carefully curated image. When her eyes land on Tiana, they linger with unmistakable contempt, taking in every detail of the teenager's modest appearance with barely concealed disgust and something far darker, the kind of assumptions that have absolutely nothing to do with economics and everything to do with deeply ingrained prejudice. Flight attendant James Miller completes his final pre-flight safety checks with the methodical precision that comes from 20 years of professional aviation experience. His trained eye immediately identifies Victoria as what the industry euphemistically calls a challenging frequent flyer, the kind whose endless complaints have reached management on multiple occasions, whose name appears on internal memos warning crew members to exercise extra caution and patience. His shoulders tense almost imperceptibly as he recognizes the unmistakable warning signs of a passenger who considers herself fundamentally above the normal rules of civil behavior and common courtesy. The boarding process continues its familiar, choreographed rhythm around them, with passengers settling into their assigned seats and stowing carry-on luggage with the weary efficiency that characterizes modern commercial travel. But Victoria's voice suddenly cuts through the ambient noise like a perfectly sharpened blade through silk. Her tone deliberately pitched to carry maximum impact and ensure that her displeasure reaches every corner of the passenger cabin. "This is absolutely unacceptable," she announces with theatrical outrage, making certain her voice projects clearly throughout the aircraft. "What kind of standards is this airline maintaining these days? Have we completely abandoned any pretense of quality control?" She gestures broadly toward the economy section, with sweeping, dismissive movements, her diamond bracelet catching the light as her arm moves in Tiana's direction, with obvious intent. Tiana glances up from her economics textbook, her intelligent dark eyes taking in the unfolding scene with the analytical skills of someone who has been trained to recognize patterns, understand social dynamics, and identify the underlying motivations behind human behavior. She notes with growing concern the way other passengers have begun to turn their heads, like flowers following sunlight, drawn inexorably toward what promises to become a public spectacle. The subtle shift in cabin atmosphere is palpable, the kind of electric tension that occurs when someone decides to deliberately create drama and controversy. Her expression remains carefully neutral and composed, though her grip tightens almost imperceptibly on her textbook's well-worn pages. Years of her father's coaching echo in her mind. "Tiana, when people try to provoke you, your composure becomes your greatest weapon. Never let someone else's lack of character diminish your own." "I mean, seriously." Victoria continues, her voice rising with carefully calculated theatrical indignation designed to draw maximum attention and sympathy from fellow passengers. The odor emanating from that particular area is absolutely revolting and completely inappropriate for enclosed spaces. I've been flying first class and business class for over 20 years, traveling to board meetings and international conferences, and I have never, in all my extensive travel experience, encountered such a blatant and offensive disregard for basic hygiene standards and elementary social courtesy. She points directly at Tiana now, abandoning any pretense of subtlety or diplomatic discretion. It's frankly disgusting and shows a complete lack of consideration for other passengers who have paid good money for their tickets and deserve a comfortable travel experience. The accusation hangs in the recycled cabin air like a toxic cloud, poisoning the atmosphere with its implications and creating an immediate division among the passengers. Tiana feels the familiar, crushing weight of unfair assumptions settling around her shoulders, like an unwelcome cloak woven from prejudice and ignorance. The sensation is one she knows all too well, the suffocating burden of being judged, not by her character, intelligence, or actions, but by superficial characteristics that have nothing to do with her worth as a human being. She had showered carefully that morning before her early flight, using her favorite vanilla-scented body wash that her grandmother had given her for her birthday. She had applied a light mist of jasmine perfume, just a touch behind her ears and on her wrists, and worn clothes fresh from the laundry, still carrying the clean scent of fabric softener that smelled like spring meadows. She performs a quick but thorough mental inventory, searching for any possible justification for such a public and humiliating complaint, but finds nothing that could reasonably support Victoria's accusations. Around them, fellow passengers begin to shift with the uncomfortable awareness that accompanies witnessing the beginning of a public confrontation. Some crane their necks with undisguised curiosity to observe the source of Victoria's theatrical displeasure, while others deliberately avoid eye contact, unwilling to become involved in what's clearly escalating into a potentially ugly scene. A few passengers discreetly cover their noses, having been influenced by the power of suggestion, while others look confused and concerned about what they're witnessing. The cabin fills with that particular electric tension that precedes either violence or spectacular public humiliation, the kind of charged atmosphere where everyone holds their breath, waiting to see which direction the situation will turn. Perhaps there's been some kind of misunderstanding here, Tiana says quietly, her voice carrying the respectful, measured tone her parents have taught her to use when addressing adults, even unreasonable ones who don't deserve such courtesy. I'm not aware of any hygiene issues on my part, and I'd be happy to address any legitimate concerns through appropriate channels if there's actually a problem. Victoria's laugh is sharp, cruel, and designed to wound. A misunderstanding? Are you seriously suggesting that I don't know what I'm smelling? That somehow I'm confused or mistaken about the evidence of my own senses? Her voice drips with condescension and barely contained fury. This is exactly what's wrong with young people today. Absolutely no accountability, always making excuses, never taking responsibility for how their actions affect decent, hard-working people around them. She turns to address the broader cabin, playing to her captive audience with the skill of someone who has spent years perfecting the art of public manipulation. This is what happens when standards completely disappear and people just don't care anymore about how they affect others. It's a perfect example of the decline in basic courtesy and social responsibility. The coded language isn't lost on Tiana or several other passengers who possess the experience and awareness to recognize the real target of Victoria's carefully crafted attack. Tiana feels the familiar tightness in her chest that comes with experiencing prejudice dressed up as legitimate complaint, discrimination disguised as reasonable concern for passenger comfort. Tiana closes her economics textbook with deliberate, controlled movements and stands, her posture straight and dignified despite being significantly shorter than Victoria. Though she's only 15, She carries herself with a poise that comes from being raised by parents who taught her that dignity isn't determined by age, size, or social status. She's learned from her father's example how to maintain composure in difficult situations, how to respond to unreasonable behavior with grace and inner strength, how to stand up for herself without descending to the level of those who attack her. "Ma'am," she begins, her voice clear, respectful, but unmistakably firm. "I understand you're concerned about passenger comfort, and I respect your right to a pleasant travel experience. However, I need to respectfully but firmly disagree with your assessment of the situation. I maintain careful personal hygiene standards, and I'm not aware of any issues that could reasonably cause discomfort to fellow passengers." Her words are chosen carefully, demonstrating the kind of thoughtful communication skills that have earned her recognition in academic debate competitions. If there's truly a problem that I'm somehow unaware of, perhaps we could ask the flight attendants to help us resolve it through appropriate and official channels, rather than creating a public scene that makes everyone uncomfortable. Victoria's eyes narrow with something cold, calculating, and genuinely dangerous. "Oh, how absolutely convenient. The little princess thinks she can just talk her way out of this with fancy words and polite language." She steps closer, deliberately using her adult height and physical presence to intimidate, looming over Tiana in a way designed to make the teenager feel small and powerless. This is completely typical behavior from people like you, always deflecting responsibility, always playing innocent, always trying to manipulate the situation with victim mentality, never taking genuine accountability for how your presence affects decent, civilized people. The phrase "people like you" lands with unmistakable intent and historical weight, carrying implications that extend far beyond any legitimate concern about passenger comfort. Tiana feels a flash of genuine anger surge through her chest, but she remembers her father's advice about maintaining dignity, even when others abandon theirs completely. In her mind, she recalls a conversation from just last year when she had faced similar treatment at a regional academic competition. A parent from a competing school had made similar assumptions about her capabilities and worthiness based on her appearance and her school's demographics. As Amikin says, her father had sat her down afterward and told her, "Tiana, there will always be people who try to diminish you based on things that have absolutely nothing to do with your character, intelligence, or abilities. Your job isn't to convince them they're wrong. Your job is to prove them wrong through your actions, your integrity, and your refusal to let their ignorance change who you are." "I'm not deflecting anything," Tiana responds with quiet dignity that belies her young age. "I'm simply stating facts based on my own knowledge and awareness of my personal hygiene practices. If you'd like to pursue this matter through official channels and proper procedures, I'm completely willing to cooperate with any reasonable investigation." James Miller approaches with the careful, measured movements of someone navigating potentially dangerous territory. His 20 years of aviation experience have taught him to recognize the warning signs of incidents that can spiral completely out of control, turning routine flights into public relations nightmares and potentially dangerous confrontations. Everything about this particular situation is raising bright red flags in his experienced mind: the obvious disparity in age and power between the participants, the coded language being used, the way other passengers are beginning to choose sides. "Ladies, is there something specific I can help resolve here?" he asks, his voice carrying the practiced authority that comes from 2 decades of managing difficult passengers and diffusing potentially explosive situations. If there are comfort concerns or other issues, we have established procedures designed to address passenger complaints in a fair and appropriate manner. Victoria immediately seizes the opportunity like a predator recognizing vulnerable prey. "Yes, there absolutely is something you can help with, and I expect immediate action." Her voice carries the imperious tone of someone accustomed to having service workers scramble to accommodate her every demand. I want to know this airline's specific policy regarding passengers who clearly lack basic social awareness and personal hygiene standards that affect the comfort and well-being of other travelers. He gestures dramatically toward Tiana, ensuring that everyone within sight understands exactly who she's targeting. I've been a loyal, platinum-level customer with this airline for over a decade. I've probably spent more money on tickets than most people spend on their automobiles. I have certain reasonable expectations about the quality of my travel experience, and I refuse to tolerate this level of discomfort and disrespect. Rose Martinez, a middle-aged elementary school teacher with graying hair and kind eyes, clears her throat from her seat 2 rows behind Tiana. She's been watching the entire interaction with growing discomfort and mounting outrage, and her professional instincts as an educator who has spent years protecting children from adult bullying finally compel her to speak up. "Excuse me," she says, her voice carrying the quiet strength that comes from years of standing up to unreasonable parents and protecting vulnerable students. But I feel obligated to point out that I've been sitting quite close to this young lady since the boarding process began, and I haven't noticed any hygiene problems whatsoever. In fact, she seems like a perfectly polite, well-groomed teenager who's been quietly reading her textbook and minding her own business. Victoria whirls on her with the fury of someone whose carefully constructed narrative is being challenged by an inconvenient witness. "Are you seriously calling me a liar? Are you suggesting that I'm somehow making false accusations for my own entertainment?" Her voice rises dangerously, carrying undertones of genuine threat. "I find it very interesting and highly suspicious that you're so quick to defend someone you don't even know. It makes me wonder what your real motivations might be." The accusation hangs in the air like a loaded weapon, suggesting that Rose might somehow be complicit in whatever imaginary wrongdoing Victoria is constructing in her mind. The tension in the cabin escalates dramatically and takes a dangerous turn when Victoria suddenly gasps with Academy Award-worthy theatrical shock, her hand flying to her throat as she points with trembling finger at her designer purse, which has somehow ended up on the floor near Tiana's feet. The expensive leather shows clear signs of having been opened, with the distinctive gold clasp hanging loose in a way that suggests hasty, unauthorized handling. "Someone has been going through my personal belongings," she shrieks, her voice carrying across the entire passenger compartment with the force of genuine hysteria mixed with calculated manipulation. "This is theft. This child has been stealing from me." Tiana stares down at the bag with genuine confusion and growing alarm etched across her young features. The situation has just escalated beyond anything she could have imagined or prepared for. "I haven't touched your purse," she says, her voice carrying the bewildered tone of someone whose world has just shifted into an alternate reality. "I don't know how it got there, or what happened to it." "Don't you dare lie to me!" Victoria's voice reaches a crescendo that seems designed to shatter glass, her face contorting with rage that appears both genuine and carefully performed. "I saw you looking at my bag earlier, when you thought no one was paying attention. You've been planning this theft from the moment you saw me board this aircraft." She retrieves the purse with exaggerated care, as if handling evidence at a crime scene, and begins rummaging through its contents with increasingly frantic movements. "My prescription medication is missing. These are controlled substances. This is a federal crime. This child has committed a felony." The accusation of drug theft sends visible shockwaves throughout the cabin, causing passengers to gasp and reach for their phones. Tiana feels the blood drain from her face as she realizes how serious this has become, how quickly a simple confrontation has transformed into potential criminal charges that could destroy her academic future and college prospects. "I haven't taken anything from you," she says, her voice stronger than she feels but carrying an undertone of genuine fear. "I would never steal anything, especially medication. I don't even know what you're talking about." "Then you won't mind being searched immediately," Victoria interrupts with triumphant satisfaction, recognizing that she's successfully trapped her young victim in an impossible situation. If you're truly innocent, you have absolutely nothing to hide from a thorough investigation. I'm calling airport security right now to have you arrested for theft of controlled substances. Tiana's carefully constructed world begins to crumble around her as she realizes with growing horror that she's being systematically framed by an adult who seems willing to destroy a teenager's life to satisfy some twisted need for power and control. But Victoria's elaborate trap becomes even more sophisticated and dangerous when she suddenly clutches her throat with both hands, her face contorting in apparent distress. "Oh God, I'm having a reaction," she gasps, stumbling slightly against the seat in front of her, her voice becoming weak and breathy. "My medication? My emergency medication. Without it, I could have a serious, life-threatening medical episode. This child has literally endangered my life by stealing my essential prescription drugs." The sudden transformation from angry accuser to medical emergency victim creates an entirely new dynamic in the cabin. The medical crisis angle transforms the situation from a simple theft complaint into a potentially life-threatening emergency, adding layers of urgency and gravity that Tiana never could have anticipated. Passengers around them gasp in genuine concern and alarm, some reaching for their phones to call for emergency medical assistance, others offering water or other aid. Tiana stands frozen in place, watching in growing horror as Victoria stages what appears to be the beginning of a medical crisis that could somehow be blamed on a 15-year-old girl's alleged theft. "Someone please help me," Victoria whispers, making sure her voice carries just far enough to be heard by nearby passengers while maintaining the illusion of weakness. "I need my medication desperately. The emergency supplies that this girl stole from me. Without them, I could go into anaphylactic shock, or worse." James Miller immediately radios for medical assistance while concerned passengers offer help and support. Tiana realizes with crystal clarity and growing terror that she's not just being accused of simple theft anymore. She's being accused of potentially endangering someone's life, of committing what could be considered attempted manslaughter through medical negligence. The weight of such accusations against a 15-year-old honor student creates a nightmare scenario that could destroy everything she's worked for, regardless of her eventual vindication. Security Officer Smith boards the aircraft with urgent, heavy footsteps, followed closely by a paramedic team responding to reports of a medical emergency in progress. The cabin instantly fills with the controlled chaos of emergency response protocols, with crew members directing the medical team while trying to maintain order among increasingly agitated passengers. Tiana finds herself standing at the center of a situation that has grown exponentially beyond anything her young mind could have imagined or prepared for. "What's the exact nature of the medical situation here?" Smith demands, his training immediately focused on the reported emergency that could potentially threaten a passenger's life. His eyes scan the scene, taking in Victoria's apparent distress and Tiana's obvious confusion and fear. Victoria, still clutching her throat but managing to speak with remarkably clarity for someone allegedly experiencing a medical crisis, immediately points a trembling finger directly at Tiana. "This teenager deliberately stole my emergency medication from my personal belongings. Without those specific drugs, I could go into anaphylactic shock or experience cardiac complications. She's literally put my life in immediate danger. And I don't think she even understands the gravity of what she's done." The paramedic begins checking Victoria's vital signs with professional efficiency, while Smith turns his stern attention to Tiana, his expression reflecting the serious nature of allegations involving both theft and potential endangerment of life. "Young lady, I need you to step aside immediately so we can conduct a thorough search of your person and belongings for the missing medical supplies." Tiana feels the world spinning around her with dizzying speed. the familiar cabin suddenly becoming a surreal nightmare where she's trapped at the center of accusations that could destroy her entire future. "I haven't stolen anything from anyone," she protests, her young voice carrying genuine fear and bewilderment. "I don't even know what medication she's talking about. This is completely insane. My EpiPen and my emergency anxiety medication." Victoria manages to gasp with carefully measured dramatic effect, her breathing appearing labored while still maintaining perfect articulation. "I saw her going through my purse when she thought no one was looking. She probably doesn't even understand how dangerous this is, how these drugs could kill someone if misused, or how their absence could kill me." Rose Martinez stands up from her seat, her teacher's instincts fully activated as she recognizes a classic case of adult bullying directed at a vulnerable child. Years of protecting students from unreasonable parents and unfair treatment have prepared her to recognize injustice when she sees it. "This is absolutely ridiculous and completely unfair," she declares, her voice carrying the authority that comes from decades of defending children. "I've been watching this young lady the entire time since boarding began. She's been sitting quietly, reading her textbook, and minding her own business. She hasn't done anything wrong." Victoria, whose alleged medical episode seems remarkably selective in its symptoms, snaps back with sudden venom that contradicts her supposed physical distress. "Are you a licensed medical doctor? Can you somehow guarantee that I'm not having a life-threatening reaction?" This woman is clearly covering for this little thief, and her interference is preventing proper medical treatment. The paramedic continues his examination of Victoria's vital signs, his professional expression revealing nothing about his assessment of her condition. Meanwhile, Smith prepares to conduct his search of Tiana's belongings, the gravity of the medical emergency adding urgency to what might otherwise be routine procedures. "Ma'am, I need to examine all of your belongings immediately to locate the missing medication," Smith states with official authority. This is now a medical emergency that takes precedence over normal privacy concerns. Tiana's hands shake almost imperceptibly as she opens her backpack with as much dignity as she can muster, revealing the innocent contents of a dedicated student's life. Well-worn textbooks filled with careful annotations, school supplies organized with typical teenage precision, acceptance letters from prestigious summer programs, and the personal items that define a 15-year-old's daily existence. No medication of any kind is visible anywhere among her possessions. "Check her pockets thoroughly," Victoria insists, her voice somehow growing stronger despite her alleged medical distress, suggesting reserves of energy that seem inconsistent with genuine medical emergency. "Check everything she's wearing. She probably hid the drugs when she realized she was caught. These substances are worth hundreds of dollars on the black market. She probably planned to sell them." The addition of drug dealing accusations to the growing list of alleged crimes sends another shockwave through the cabin. Passengers who had been trying to remain neutral now stare at Tiana with mixtures of suspicion, concern, and confusion. Some are filming the incident with their phones, while others whisper among themselves about the serious nature of stealing someone's life-saving medication. As Smith begins a more thorough search of Tiana's clothing and personal effects, she feels completely helpless and violated. The other passengers watch with fascination and judgment as her privacy is stripped away in public, her dignity sacrificed to Victoria's elaborate performance. "I need everyone here to understand the full gravity of this situation," Victoria announces with increasing strength that belies her supposed medical condition. "Without my prescribed emergency medication, I could literally die. This child has put my life at risk for whatever small amount of money she thought she could get by selling my prescription drugs on the street. The weight of such serious accusations, theft, drug dealing, endangering life, settles over Tiana like a suffocating blanket." She realizes with crystal clarity that even if the truth eventually emerges, the damage to her reputation, her college prospects, and her entire future could prove irreparable. Just as Smith reaches toward Tiana's hoodie pocket, where she knows with absolute certainty there should be nothing more incriminating than perhaps a tissue or a piece of gum, his radio crackles, with an urgent message that cuts through the cabin tension like lightning. Security, this is Flight Operations Control. CEO Richard Hill is en route to the aircraft with immediate priority clearance. Do not remove any passengers from this flight until his personal arrival. He has specifically requested that his daughter not be detained or removed under any circumstances. The word daughter stops everyone in their tracks like a physical force. Victoria's supposed medical distress seems to pause mid-episode as the implications of this development begin to sink into her consciousness. Daughter? Victoria whispers, her voice suddenly much stronger and more controlled than it has been during her alleged medical emergency. What daughter? There's no CEO's daughter here, just a common thief who tried to kill me by stealing my life-saving medication. But James Miller is staring at Tiana with new recognition, pieces of a complex puzzle suddenly falling into place in his experienced mind. The composed demeanor despite extreme stress, the quality of her speech and reasoning, the expensive textbooks despite modest clothing, the way she carries herself with quiet confidence, details that suddenly make perfect sense when viewed through a different lens. The cabin fills with electric tension as everyone realizes that this situation is about to undergo a dramatic transformation that none of them could have predicted. The aircraft door opens with hydraulic authority that seems to command immediate attention throughout the cabin, and Richard Hill steps aboard with the quiet, understated confidence of someone who has spent decades wielding genuine power without needing to announce it. At 58, he carries himself with the kind of natural authority that comes not from arrogance or display, but from genuine competence and earned respect. His suit is clearly expensive but not flashy, chosen for quality rather than ostentation, and his manner projects professional capability tempered with unmistakable warmth. Behind him follow his personal assistant, a woman in her 30s, carrying a tablet and wearing the focused expression of someone accustomed to managing crises. And Starwing Airline's head of security, a former federal agent whose presence immediately shifts the entire dynamic of the situation. The effect on the cabin is immediate, electric, and transformative. James Miller straightens to full attention, his years of aviation training recognizing the presence of ultimate corporate authority. Other crew members appear from various stations throughout the aircraft, their body language shifting into the heightened alertness that comes when the person who controls their careers arrives unexpectedly to handle a situation personally. Tiana's entire demeanor transforms completely at the sight of her father. The tension that has been building in her young shoulders throughout this ordeal melts away like ice in sunlight, replaced by an uncomplex mixture of profound relief, deep love, and slight embarrassment at being discovered in such a difficult and public situation. "Dad," she says simply, the single word carrying years of absolute trust, unconditional love, and the deep affection that defines their relationship. Richard moves directly to his daughter with purposeful strides, his experienced eyes quickly scanning her for any signs of physical distress or emotional trauma. When he notices the security officer still holding search equipment and observes Victoria's theatrical positioning near the paramedic team, his expression darkens with barely controlled anger that seems all the more dangerous for being so carefully restrained. "Tiana," he says, placing a protective hand on her shoulder with gentle firmness. "Are you hurt? Has anyone harmed you physically or threatened you in any way?" Victoria stands frozen in place, her brain struggling desperately to process this dramatic and unexpected shift in circumstances that threatens to destroy her carefully constructed narrative. The teenager she has spent the past hour publicly humiliating, falsely accusing of serious crimes, and potentially trying to have arrested is not just any random passenger. She is the daughter of someone powerful enough to stop an aircraft departure with a single phone call and command the immediate attention of airport security. "I'm okay, Dad," Tiana responds, though her voice carries the slight tremor of someone who has just endured significant psychological trauma and public humiliation. "But this lady has been accusing me of stealing her medication and claims I tried to hurt her. She says I put her life in danger." Richard's attention turns to Victoria for the first time, and his gaze carries the intensity of winter sunlight. Brilliant, penetrating, but absolutely cold. "Mrs. Sterling," he says with calm precision, and the fact that he knows her name without introduction sends a visible shock through her entire system. "I understand you've been having some very serious concerns about my 15-year-old daughter." Your daughter," Victoria stammers, the words seeming to stick in her throat like sand while her mind races to recalculate her position in this suddenly transformed situation. "But she was sitting in economy class and she's just a teenager and she looks like..." "She's my daughter," Richard states with quiet finality that brooks no argument or qualification. "And she was traveling to visit several universities for her early admission interviews. Tiana is completing high school a year ahead of schedule and has already been accepted to multiple prestigious universities with full academic scholarships." He reaches into his jacket with deliberate movement and withdraws a tablet computer, swiping the screen to access Starwing Airline's comprehensive internal surveillance system. "Mrs. Sterling, you've made some extremely serious accusations against my child, including theft of controlled substances and endangering your life. I've taken the liberty of reviewing our complete security footage to determine exactly what transpired during this flight." Victoria's face drains of all color as she realizes the implications of comprehensive video surveillance that would capture every moment of her elaborate deception. "Security footage. Every Starwing aircraft is equipped with state-of-the-art surveillance systems that record continuously from multiple angles in high definition," Richard continues, his voice maintaining professional calm, even as his words deliver devastating psychological impact. "Every passenger interaction, every movement, every gesture is captured and stored. Shall we review what actually transpired over the past 2 hours?" The tablet screen illuminates with crystal-clear footage from multiple camera angles, providing comprehensive coverage of the cabin from different perspectives. Richard navigates to the relevant timestamps with practiced efficiency, providing clinical, devastating commentary as the scenes of Victoria's deception unfold with undeniable clarity. "Here we observe you deliberately removing items from your own purse and placing them in a secure location within your jacket pocket," he narrates with detached, prosecutorial precision. "Here we see you intentionally dropping your purse near Tiana's feet while she was completely absorbed in reading her textbook and paying no attention to her surroundings. The footage is comprehensive, undeniable, and utterly damning." Victoria watches her own carefully calculated actions played back in high definition. Every gesture of her elaborate deception captured with perfect clarity from multiple angles, leaving no room for alternative interpretation or plausible denial. "But the question that fascinates me most," Richard continues with controlled intensity, "is why? Why would a grown woman deliberately frame a 15-year-old child for crimes she didn't commit?" Tiana steps forward slightly, her young voice carrying a wisdom and insight that seems far beyond her years. "I think I understand why, Dad," she says quietly, her words carrying the weight of painful experience. "From the very first moment she saw me, Mrs. Sterling made assumptions and judgments based on my appearance, my seating assignment, my age, and my race. When those initial assumptions weren't enough to justify the hostilities she felt, she decided to create a situation that would validate her prejudices and give her an excuse to have me removed and arrested." Victoria tries desperately to speak, to offer some explanation or justification, but no words emerge from her throat. The elaborate construction of lies and false accusations has collapsed completely around her, leaving her exposed, defenseless, and facing the consequences of actions she never imagined would be discovered and documented so thoroughly. Richard nods grimly, his expression reflecting both pride in his daughter's mature analysis and anger at the injustice she has endured. Racial profiling followed by deliberate fabrication of evidence and false accusations. Mrs. Sterling, you have just committed multiple federal crimes on camera, aboard an aircraft owned by the company you were attempting to manipulate and extort. Richard signals to his head of security, who steps forward with official documentation that has clearly been prepared in advance, suggesting that Tiana's father had been monitoring the situation and planning his response even before boarding the aircraft. Mrs. Sterling, you are hereby permanently banned from flying with Starwing Airlines, effective immediately. This ban will be reported to the Federal Aviation Administration and shared with all major carriers through industry security networks. Victoria's knees buckle slightly as the full implications of her situation finally penetrate her consciousness. A lifetime ban from flying would effectively end her consulting business, which depends entirely on her ability to travel to client locations across the country and internationally. You can't do that, she protests with desperate intensity. I need to fly for my work. My entire business, my livelihood, my financial survival depends on air travel. You should have considered those potential consequences before you decided to commit multiple federal crimes against a child. Richard responds without a trace of sympathy or flexibility in his voice. Officer Smith, I want a complete report filed with appropriate authorities. What Mrs. Sterling has done constitutes harassment of a minor, filing false police reports, staging evidence, and quite possibly hate crime charges depending on how the investigation develops. But Victoria isn't finished fighting for her survival. She turns to Tiana with desperation clearly visible in her eyes, her voice taking on a pleading tone that contrasts sharply with her earlier arrogance and hostility. You're just a kid. You don't understand how the real world works yet. If you speak up for me now, tell them this was all a misunderstanding, I can help your future career in ways you can't imagine. I have connections throughout the business world, influence with major corporations and universities. Tiana looks at her with something approaching pity, her response demonstrating a level of emotional maturity that puts Victoria's behavior to shame. Mrs. Sterling, can I ask you something personal? Do you have children of your own? The question catches Victoria completely off guard, disrupting her desperate attempt at manipulation. Yes, I have a teenage daughter. She's 17, just a year older than you. And what kind of world do you want her to grow up in? Tiana asks with quiet intensity and wisdom that seems far beyond her 15 years. Do you want her to live in a society where adults can terrorize children based on prejudice and assumptions? Where lies and manipulation are considered acceptable tools for getting what you want? Where people are judged by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character? Victoria's carefully maintained composure finally cracks, completely, under the weight of Tiana's questions. I never thought about it that way. When I saw you, you looked like someone who... I looked like what exactly? Tiana presses gently but firmly, her voice carrying the strength that comes from knowing she has truth and justice on her side. Like someone who didn't belong? Like someone who deserved less respect and consideration because of how I was dressed or the color of my skin? Like someone whose dreams and future didn't matter as much as your temporary discomfort? Rose Martinez stands up from her seat, her voice carrying clearly across the cabin with the authority of someone who has spent years advocating for children and justice. I want everyone here to remember this moment and what we've all witnessed today. Remember how easily prejudice can disguise itself as legitimate complaint, how quickly assumptions can transform into accusations, how readily adults can abandon their responsibility to protect children, and remember how absolutely crucial it is for good people to speak up when they witness injustice happening to others. Several passengers throughout the cabin nod in agreement, many beginning to applaud with growing enthusiasm. The sound starts softly but builds steadily, filling the cabin with recognition of something significant. The triumph of truth over prejudice. The victory of courage over cowardice. The power of standing up for what's right, even in the face of overwhelming pressure. Victoria looks around desperately at the faces surrounding her, some angry, some disappointed, some disgusted, but all of them now seeing her clearly for exactly what she is. The social superiority and moral authority she thought she possessed has evaporated completely, leaving her isolated, exposed, and facing consequences she never imagined possible. "Please," she whispers to Tiana one final time, her voice barely audible above the growing applause. "I know sorry doesn't fix anything that I've done, but I am genuinely, deeply sorry. I let my prejudices and assumptions control my actions, and I deliberately hurt an innocent child who never did anything to deserve such treatment." Tiana studies her for a long moment before responding with remarkable maturity and grace. "I accept your apology, Mrs. Sterling, and I genuinely hope you learn from this experience. But acceptance doesn't erase consequences or undo damage. Actions have results, and you're going to have to live with yours for a very long time." Richard places his arm around his daughter's shoulders with obvious pride and protectiveness. "Tiana, I'm incredibly proud of how you handled this impossible situation. You showed more maturity, grace, and wisdom under extreme pressure than most adults ever manage in their entire lives." As airport security prepares to escort Victoria from the aircraft, she turns back one final time with a question that seems to come from genuine confusion and perhaps the beginning of self-awareness. "How do you do it?" she asks Tiana, with something approaching wonder. "How do you stay so strong, so dignified, when people are trying to destroy you?" Tiana considers the question seriously before responding with quiet confidence that reflects years of good parenting and solid values. "Because I know who I am," she answers simply. "I know my worth isn't determined by other people's opinions, prejudices, or assumptions about me. And I know that responding to hatred with more hatred just makes the world a darker, more painful place for everyone." "Tiana..." Victoria nods slowly, perhaps beginning to understand the magnitude of what she has lost. Not just her flying privileges and business prospects, but her self-respect, and the respect of everyone who witnessed her shameful behavior. As the aircraft finally begins its significantly delayed departure, Richard settles into the seat beside his daughter, the cabin gradually returning to something approaching normalcy. However, the events of the past 3 hours have left an indelible mark on everyone present, creating the kind of shared experience that changes perspectives and challenges assumptions in fundamental ways. "Are you really okay, sweetheart?" he asks quietly, his paternal concern temporarily overriding his executive composure as he studies his daughter's face for signs of lasting emotional damage. Tiana nods thoughtfully, though she appears emotionally exhausted from the ordeal she has endured. "I'm fine, Dad. Tired and a little shaken, but ultimately fine. It's so exhausting sometimes, you know? Having to constantly prove your humanity and worth to people who have already decided you don't deserve basic respect or consideration." "I know," Richard says softly, his voice carrying the weight of his own experiences with prejudice and discrimination throughout his career. "And I'm deeply sorry you had to experience something so traumatic and unfair. But I'm also incredibly proud of how you handled yourself under impossible circumstances. You demonstrated more wisdom, maturity, and grace under extreme pressure than most adults I know, including many of my business colleagues." Tiana leans back in her seat, processing the experience with the thoughtfulness that characterizes her approach to difficult situations. "I kept thinking about what you've always taught me, about letting my character and actions speak louder than other people's prejudices and assumptions. For a while there, I wasn't sure it would be enough to protect me." "It was more than enough," Richard assures her with conviction. You didn't just defend yourself today. You educated everyone on this aircraft about dignity, integrity, courage, and the power of remaining true to your principles, even when the world seems determined to tear you down. Rose Martinez approaches their seats with a warm but serious expression, clearly wanting to acknowledge what she has witnessed. I hope you don't mind the interruption, but I wanted to thank you both for what happened here today. What I witnessed has given me a tremendous amount to think about regarding my own responses to discrimination and injustice. I realized that I've been silent too many times when I should have spoken up to protect others. Tiana smiles warmly at the older woman, her response reflecting genuine appreciation for the support she received. Speaking up for others isn't always easy, especially when you're not the direct target of discrimination or prejudice. But your support meant absolutely everything to me today. It reminded me that there are genuinely good people in the world who are willing to take risks to stand up for what's right. Richard extends his hand to Rose with genuine respect. Mrs. Martinez, if you're ever interested in learning more about our youth mentorship programs and diversity initiatives, I'd be honored to share some information with you. We're always looking for allies and advocates in the work of creating positive change. The conversation gradually draws the attention of other passengers throughout the cabin, and soon Tiana finds herself engaged in an impromptu discussion about racism, privilege, discrimination, and the critical importance of standing up for others who are being targeted unfairly. She's struck by how many adults admit to remaining silent in similar situations, not out of malice or agreement with the discrimination, but out of uncertainty about how to help effectively without making situations worse. The thing that people need to understand, Tiana explains with remarkable insight for someone her age, is that silence in the face of injustice is actually a choice with real consequences. It's not a neutral position. When good people stay quiet and passive, bad behavior gets normalized and continues to hurt innocent people. A businessman from the first-class section raises his hand tentatively, clearly wanting to engage with the discussion. But what if we say the wrong thing? What if we accidentally make the situation worse instead of better? Tiana considers this thoughtful question seriously before responding. Sometimes you might say something imperfect or less than ideal, and that's completely okay. The important thing is making the effort, showing the person being attacked that they're not alone and isolated. Even something as simple as, "This doesn't seem right," or "I don't think this is fair," can make a huge difference in how the victim feels and how the situation develops. Richard watches his daughter with obvious admiration as she transforms a traumatic personal experience into a valuable teaching moment for an entire aircraft full of people. This is exactly the kind of leadership the world desperately needs. Someone who can turn crisis into opportunity, who can build bridges instead of walls, who can create positive change through personal example rather than empty rhetoric. And that's the remarkable story of how a routine flight became a masterclass in courage, dignity, and the transformative power of standing up for what's right in the face of overwhelming opposition. Tiana Hill, 15-year-old daughter of Starwing Airline's CEO Richard Hill, proved beyond any doubt that true strength and wisdom have absolutely nothing to do with age, size, or social status, but everything to do with character, integrity, and moral conviction. As for Victoria Sterling, her lifetime ban from Starwing Airlines proved to be just the beginning of her consequences. When high-definition security footage of her elaborate, staged accusations against a teenager went viral across social media platforms, 17 other major airlines quickly implemented their own permanent bans. Her consulting business collapsed completely within 3 weeks, as corporate clients rushed to distance themselves from the toxic publicity and avoid association with someone who had publicly attacked a child. But here's perhaps the most remarkable part of this entire story. Tiana used this traumatic and unfair experience as the foundation for her high school senior project on combating discrimination against young people in educational and professional settings. Her comprehensive research and innovative solutions have since been implemented across the entire Starwing Airlines Corporation and are currently being studied and adapted by child advocacy organizations, schools, and businesses nationwide. The prescription medication that Victoria claimed had been stolen and that supposedly put her life in medical danger? Security footage revealed she had hidden it in her own jacket pocket before boarding the aircraft, planning to discover it later to make Tiana appear even more guilty and dangerous. The elaborate scheme had been planned and rehearsed, suggesting this wasn't her first attempt at such manipulation. Tiana graduated as valedictorian of her high school class at age 16 and is currently studying at Stanford University on a full academic scholarship, majoring in business ethics with a focus on social justice and corporate responsibility. She has already been featured in Time magazine's prestigious 30 Under 30 list for her groundbreaking work in corporate accountability and youth advocacy programs. What would you have done in Tiana's incredibly difficult situation? Could you have maintained such remarkable composure, dignity, and moral clarity while being publicly accused and humiliated by an adult with obvious intent to cause harm? And perhaps most importantly, what will you do the next time you witness an adult targeting a young person with discrimination, prejudice, or unfair treatment? Share this story if you believe that age should never determine human worth, that courage and wisdom can emerge at any stage of life, and that sometimes the most powerful response to hatred and injustice is simply refusing to let it change your fundamental character. Because in a world that too often underestimates young people and their capacity for leadership, stories like Tiana's serve as powerful reminders that the future belongs to those who combine intelligence with integrity, regardless of their age. Subscribe for more inspiring stories about young heroes making extraordinary differences in their communities and beyond, and always remember, you never know when the teenager sitting next to you might be exactly the kind of leader our world desperately needs to see in action.